Welcome to this special edition podcast series, Surviving the Shitstorm with me, Michael Tinkser. Today's guest, Brian Moore, is a very special friend and business connection of mine. Brian is a global retail expert, analyst, trainer, and writer with decades of experience. Brian is also the CEO of EMR NamNews, a daily and monthly newsletter covering everything from supermarket to food service. We'll be talking about the current situation, how to navigate the storm, the importance and power of the good old 4Ps, and positioning, and much more. Thanks to our partner HGM, Tahola, and Vita Mojo, who are making this possible. Grab headphones and enjoy. Thank you for joining us in today's special edition podcast series, Surviving the Shitstorm. We say the 1st of April 2020, and our society and a lot of industries, especially food and retail, has ended in what I would call a shitstorm due to the coronavirus. A lot of leaders in the last couple of weeks has been through some very tough decisions. There's businesses that's been closed, people that's been made redundant, government that came out with some massive packages. To sum some of these things up, I've invited a very good friend and colleague of mine, Brian Moore, which I've actually talked with before on the podcast. And we were talking about a year ago about something coming, something big. And I don't think any of us had predicted that it was something of this scale. So welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Thank you very much, Michael. Looking forward again.
If people out there don't know who Brian Moore is or NamNews, could you just give a quick overview about who you are and what NamNews is all about and what you guys are doing?
Okay, Michael, and I'm bearing in mind the limited time scale, but effectively, just to summarize, what I basically do is provide trade updates on developments in trade affecting supply and demand across FMCG, food service, and every other sector that is of interest to our readers. We've been doing that for about 40 years. We've previous to that have been in, brand marketing, medical sales, which is a complicated sale in the sense that you sell to the someone you do not know, and to someone who a third party actually pays for it, in other words, the NHS. So that got me interested in selling. I then developed into that from marketing. I had been basically trained as an engineer, so from that point of view, I had the actual numbers. So all of this brought it together, and 40 years ago, we set up, as I say, NamNews Cam City, and here's where I am today. As you know, in our last discussion, we were talking about a reset coming, and I agree totally. An unprecedented reset has occurred in terms of economics, obviously, in terms of society, banking, and politics as well. So from that point of view, we need to review our thinking, to say the least, and thankfully we have this opportunity together to do that now.
Lots gone on, a lot of dark news I mentioned, a lot of help packages coming out. Where do you see things, from a short term right now here? Because it feels a bit like the shock. We're out of the shock phase now. We are, for some, are gone into, we still need to solve out a bit of challenges in our companies, finding out, how many people can we keep on and so on. But it feels like the healing period is starting. It feels like this tsunami that came in and now it's gone, and now we passed the A&E. Now we just need to recover, and we still have a health crisis going on at the same time. We don't know. We're trying to beat the curve, as they talk about, so we don't break the hospital system. But where do you see the whole world is in all this, and are we actually somewhere? And it's actually easy to predict where we are right now.
Right. First of all, it's interesting you say we're dealing with all of this problem while the health crisis is going on, and you put your finger on something I really believe to be the case. In other words, it is easy to blame coronavirus on all of what is happening this time. In practice, it is simply, in my mind, a catalyst that has accelerated fault lines that have been evident in companies and their performance since the global financial crisis back in 2008. So in other words, we've had a stock market that has been artificially hyped up, irrespective of the state of companies in terms of their profit and loss in terms of balance sheets, etc. In other words, for whatever reason, we've been in a bull market all this time, and we now have a reset of that, back to reality. So from that point of view, it's not that difficult to understand. When it comes to short term and long term, what I'm finding very, very helpful is to put in another phase, which is medium term as well, that allows people to break up their thinking into the immediacy of the firefighting, which is what we're going through in the current chaos. In the medium term, then, we're talking about when this is likely to finish. In other words, the health override, if you like. And I truly believe that the steps the government have taken mean that within 4 weeks we will be back at our desks. Because by that time the government can claim success of the salute, if you like, the therapy in a manner of speaking. So from a political point that can go on, can claim credit for the cure. Okay. But then we can get back to business, and we will have to. There will be issues of people still feeling it's dangerous to meet closely with other people, etc. I think if they see this as if you like, another version of influenza, then the time period that has elapsed, along with another 4 weeks, should see us over the top of that problem. Medium term, then, we're talking getting back. But meantime, companies are going bust and will continue to do, but others are beginning to rebuild their business models. Okay, what is accelerating, of course, and is obvious to everybody, is to move online in all respects, and that has to be good. But it does mean businesses are having to change a little bit in terms of accepting the fact and trusting people to work at home, and the evidence of that will emerge. But then it'll raise questions as to the viability of large office space and commuting when people have had the chance to think again about these matters.
Just interesting, would you say, with people commuting and office space again, because again, that's real estate. And, I guess there's a lot of companies also find out that they don't need to have big offices and a lot of people in the office all the time. You can actually run businesses remotely.
Yeah, but what that means in practice is that, for instance, the idea of having very expensive centralized office in the middle of, say, London becomes questionable. Bankers who actually own the properties in many cases begin to question then the value of that asset on their books. If they then have the value of the asset is acknowledged as being lower, then their cover for credit given is altered, and they breach government, if you like, guidelines or even rules on how much they're meant to keep in reserve versus what they can lend. So that challenged the loan to, as I say, ratios in terms of the asset values. So that'll be an interesting one. Out of that will come the interest that they charge in order to make that viable, etc. But banks are now looking at that whole idea of reassessing rental streams and thereby, again, as you know, value of properties upon which they're based. And that's just one knock on that's going to all, and they must be working very fast on that idea, try and adjust it.
Yeah, and another thing, I don't know if you mentioned that long term, but one of the things I've heard the last couple of weeks, and especially because the industry I come from, restaurants and hospitality, are very cash flow dependent, and all cash disappeared. All customers disappeared, and liquidity was thereby dried out. What is that gonna do on a medium term? Because I can see already now in hospitality there is as we already gone through a couple of days after the storm started to settle down and the firefighting, you can see a lot of change are going into administration. That doesn't mean they're done. There could be a restructure that goes on, but again, it goes very fast from 1 week to be in operation and serving customers to be in administration. It shows you how cash tight they were as well. And many of them are, because it is totally depending, small to big. even independent restaurants. So, and I guess it's the same for many retail and the high street as well. So what is that going to do? Medium term, is that going to do we going to see a massive slaughter of businesses over the next coming months, where we are hibernating at home?
No, what you're totally, Michael. And basically, if anybody is doing what ifs, and they should be conducting these what ifs on possible scenarios, especially in hospitality, if they're not looking seriously at a 50% to 25% reduction in numbers of outlets, just that very basic fact, they're being unrealistic. It is going to be that radical, I believe. So obviously, and that's why I go back to the 12 years since the last, as I say, global financial crisis, and this is just a new one. People, no one, not many people are cash rich. They've worked down to the lowest level in terms of profitability. Retailers that were traditionally 6 or 7% net profit, or 1 or 2% net profit if they're lucky. Okay, but especially in hospitality, that I see as a cash business in a manner of speaking. They are going through something now that is not just a cash crisis, but people that were normally eating in their premises are now living at home, rediscovering, cooking for themselves, making do a little bit more, etc. These are all combined threats for the future of that sector. To actually get them to come in, book, and be a little bit apprehensive still, no matter how far ahead this is, about being too close to the neighbours, means tables being separated just to meet that psychological need. It will be a totally unrealistic, but basically a perception of people coming in that should not be too close to people. So we now have these, as I say, restaurants, cafes, etc., having to redesign the model. Some have done so by having cash, if you like, click and collect. Again, the problem with that is they're sited in places where they're paying rent, high rent based on traffic. That traffic's disappeared. To convert those to a click and collect, they should then move out of town to a warehouse somewhere and do it there, as the dark stores were a trend towards that with Deliveroo we talked about before. So that's the problem. It's going to be radical. When you go online and convert click and collect, the actual collect part is only part of the final mile of costs. There's still got the other costs of servicing an online offering, which I reckon every transaction at least £25. Now then you've got to have a high minimum order to make that worthwhile, and they simply coming to collect are taking a little bit of that cost away. The owner of the establishment is actually carrying a lot more than that. So that's the sort of dilemma and how fundamental the problem is for people.
What about you were saying, now we talked a bit about the medium term. What is going to happen when we see the light on the other side, when we come through this? Because I talked with a lot of different people and had a couple of guests on the podcast. I think many cannot see that when this is going to end. They're just saying it's looking into, a deep, deep dark hole, and you can't see the light for the end of it yet. You're just falling through this hole, and nobody knows if it's, that's been talked about 6 months lockdown, 9 months. The wildest one I've heard is 12 months. And, before the economy kicks back in, we probably 18 months, 2-3 years,
If you talk about, yeah, I understand, Michael, that if you talk about lockdown, that cannot be allowed to go much further than 4 to 8 weeks. Absolutely. And I mean that because the country cannot afford really what it's taken on in terms of financing people to stay at home effectively. So that's the problem. So ways will be found to get people back, inverted commas, to normal. It won't be normal. There will be big gaps there in terms of what has changed. Companies will have gone bust. Well, we just see Carluccio finally going, but well expected in the past least year, 2 years of trading from that point of view. So again, there's smaller places. Family run have a hope, I suppose, in a way that can be very specific, very tailored to local need, and employ the family to cover some of the, if you like, the labour effort is required. So from that point of view, people will survive without a doubt, but there will be a radically changed landscape out there.
Is there anyone winning right now? What are you seeing out there?
Well, obviously, anybody in food retail for sure, health and beauty secondarily, and the health part of that obvious as well. You're talking about anybody supplying the health service have got a real advantage there. So people are winning by having combinations with hospital shops, for instance. They can meet the needs of both the NHS staff, for instance, and equally retailers need to actually get traffic in that respect. So those ways will evolve and be found, and that will flourish, I would suggest. But others will be radically damaged. As they say, transport, the whole airline industry is being hit very badly, where you have primarily leased aircraft. As soon as their sales turnover goes down by 25% and they just can't afford to finance the fleet, government then have to put in basically big money. For instance, American Airlines have asked the government over in the States for 12 billion injection of dollars. That's very big money in that respect in an impossible situation. Tourism itself is going to be very moderated after, at least in the first year or so after this. People are just afraid to commit in terms of going there from health or other point of view, even if they're allowed to travel. So some industries, big question marks over them. The government cannot nationalise everything. It shouldn't, from that point of view. It was a real issue for sure.
You touched about a bit like on the government supporting this, and this is massive packages, and they've gone really fast, and they are tremendous big amounts. And one of my questions has been the last couple of weeks, how can we afford all this? Because we couldn't afford anything before this, and suddenly we can afford everything. And I know there has been austerity, and there's probably some extra money in the checkers box in there, but I guess this is also a bit of a gamble in a way to keep the country calm.
It is a big gamble, and it is printing money, and eventually we are reliant on the confidence of people in the currency and in government in order to accept that value for money. It's going down because of the printing of excess, etc. So from that point of view, a real challenge. We will be paying this back somehow. The part of this reset is, in fact, an acknowledgement that we've been living too long on borrowed money. So from that point of view, there will be pressure to, if you like, collect more tax and to actually cut down expenditure on the country in a manner of speaking. So it's not for nothing. We're getting a holiday on these issues, but the government, being a government, don't cover everybody. And from that point of view, the significant gaps in the support package are evident already in terms of missing out self-employed people totally, and creative industry particularly, which is the source of all growth for the future. Because at the very basic level, these startups depend on, as I say, the enthusiasm and, as I say, creativity of young people entering the market in various roles, etc. And to have missed that out totally is something they will, I believe, have to correct. But keep in mind broadly that the burden increasing overall for the whole country in terms of maintaining people's position within it.
Have they done enough? There's people that want more out there. I know from my industry, the operators want more. They want, help to rent-free periods up to 9 months. There's some quite big demands coming as well now. Still, even though there's been, should they do more, or is this, or do you think this is already more than they can actually commit to afford, because there's a bottom in every pocket, I say
Well,
normally.
this is it, and it has to be paid by someone. So to give a mortgage holiday of 3 months means a bank is having to be refinanced in some way to tolerate that. So from that point of view, we should be conscious of the fact that these steps have a cost, but without it, it would have been total chaos rather than just relative chaos if they had not done it. So politically, they had to do that. The question is a tightening of belts for the future, giving people a little breathing space, making sure that there are no people falling through a crack that shouldn't be falling through, as I mentioned a bit earlier, from that point of view. So, broadly speaking, they're doing what could reasonably be expected to happen. And I'm talking government here. The question is how we pick ourselves up afterwards in terms of the country and equally individual businesses within that. I think the answer basically is that people have to just go very much back to basics and the supply and demand in terms of setting up a business, identifying real need, etc. So from that point of view, I see it in terms of reviewing the business model. The model we used before is no longer fit for purpose. It cannot be. It would never envisage this type of change. Now has to say, what do people out there who are now increasingly savvy, they've had time to stay at home to review their thinking, their relationships, the relationship with the family, with the brands, with suppliers, with retailers, etc. And they're thinking, inverted commas, properly and fundamentally for the first time and have time to so do. So from that point of view, they're going to come back savvy, at least, and demanding demonstrable value for money and not taking any nonsense from that point of view. So to then sit down and say, right, if I was starting this business from scratch, in other words, right at the beginning, what would I be looking at? What type of people would I be, if you like, targeting the business at? To what their circumstances, not what they want, but what they really need, and get to that fundamental, and then begin to see, can I put a package together that could meet that need and still make enough money to continue the good work? Could I afford to be very honest with them as to the advantages of what my product or service is? And on that basis, at a price that it compares very well with anyone they try to compare me with in similar aspects of the market. So, all very basic stuff from that point of view. I want to be able to look, if you like, carefully at my competitors objectively, not assuming that we are fantastic and they are rubbish, but rather saying from the point of view of a consumer coming into a restaurant and sitting down, how does this compare with their other experience of restaurants? To what extent are we meeting their price expectations versus quality, etc.? In other words, and I again revert to the very basic textbook, what combination of the four P's in terms of product or service, prices and terms, presentation, and place where they avail of the offering, what are we balancing within that mix to optimize the contact with them? Sounds even a bit theoretical, but in practice, I believe with 40 years of practicing it, that's the basic. And that when they compare that with other people providing similar services or products, that we stand out a little, not radically, but just enough to be different and be attractive in terms of coming back for more. So that's what I feel people need to do. And in terms of steps in this terrible, as I say, chaos, we have to just look at that. We then have to, again, look at our customer base. And again, I believe the easiest people to sell to are those who, for whatever reason, like what we do. So we revisit our current customers or clients and say, right, why are they satisfied with us? Are they getting everything we can give them? Can we add more? We then say, of those people, can I identify new products that they need and supply them those products or services? So now I got, as I say, that group of people, my basic customer base, on two levels of new product and current product. Then say, well, what was so good about that current product? Can we look for new people that actually would be of the same profile and thereby accept our current product, our best product, or best service. And to complete, if you like, it is the ANSOF model, as you know from previous stuff we've written and discussed, that you then strike a flyer on uh, putting out new products for totally new customer types. You don't know them, they don't know you, high risk, but you never know. Question is, how much effort do I put? I put 50% into the current product to current people. That 50% of my time, money, and people just aiming at just optimizing what we got already and stop them slipping into the hands of a competitor. I then can do 15% on top of as I say, the new products to current customers. And gradually I end up with only 5% just having a look at new products for new customer types. But broadly, that's my total resource taken care of from that point of view. And it's worked for years. There's nothing, it's independent of the circumstances because it acknowledges the actual circumstances. One of the key things for people is saying, right, stop myself from trying to go back to the norm of yesterday that seemed to work. Redefine the new norm. In other words, as you said several times in this interview, what will the world look like when this is over? And then what do I do to gear myself up for that in the non financial sense? So, in other words, key with the norm is there's no absolute, I believe. It's rather your version for the particular type of strength and that you have in terms of what you offer. Be able to then say, this is my definition of my norm. I'm going to live with that as reality, and I'm going to now take action based on that, not just philosophize about what the new norm looks like, rather accept a definition of it and then go for action. That's it. Seth Godin spends time saying this over and over again, and to my mind, extremely good advice in that respect.
In a way, you are just saying it's buckle down on what you, in principle, in my view as well, always should be working on is understanding your. There's also called positioning. That was what it was called when I was in a university. What. Why are we here? What kind of problem are we solving, or what kind of need did you call it? Are we putting and I think you're right about the whole thing. When I've been talking a lot with the businesses I'm involved in, and we have been through all the firefighting in the last couple of weeks. But now we're starting to say, what kind of business are we going to be on the other side? How are we going to make people feel safe? Because if you can do that with your business or your solution, and give people comfort, then I think you have something. And then also I think in my view, there's going to be a world where you have to care. If you don't care, people will figure it out and they will spend their money somewhere else. Their hard-earned money going to be spent with companies that care about not only people, product, but also the planet. Because there's another crisis coming on the back of this, as I say to many people. It's called climate change, and and this is just an early warning from Mother Earth. That's what I've said to a couple of people, I believe. So, and then they came on top of that an overheated economy, the collapse, as you say.
And then we are in real trouble. But basically, what you're describing there is trust. The whole essence of a brand, be it a restaurant brand or be it a product in a tin, is effectively I don't have to second guess the content of this. They put the brand on, I know what I'm getting, and by the way, I get a little bit more, so I'm pleased with that also. That is, I keep boiling it down to that idea, is that you literally represent some sort of value, predictability in terms of being able to, as I say, lift the lid and know what to expect. The crooks will be opportunists and will take advantage of this situation without a doubt. They'll even rob people in hospitals, as we're reading about in the press. Terrible, you know, but they will be found out. We have the technology, etc., to at least eliminate a lot of that con activity in that respect. But meanwhile, if you like, honest broker is simply going through trying to put little packages together and sell them for a reasonable price, as good as or perhaps better than something you can buy alternatively from other people. And when people abuse the product or service, come back for more willingly. That's all you can expect or should expect and aim for, I think. And that will only be enhanced after some of this changes has occurred and we're settling down a little bit to whatever becomes normal for us, I think.
Where can, in your view, if you had to say there's three places or two places where, business people or business leader that is really hit by this industries like the, retail, restaurants, where can they go for, help? Where should they go for? Because what you're asking as well and trying to say, in my view, is that you need to think a lot out of the box, not just a little, a lot out of the box.
Totally, Michael. And the key is, I think the question really is, um, how do I deal with the multitude of people who will be coming to me with suggestions to solve my business problems? So I think rather than having to go and find help, they will be sitting there trying to evaluate the help that's being offered. So, from that point of view, we become skilled in reassessing and choosing value for money in what we hear. There will be more than enough people looking for work in terms of consulting and other things who actually will be offering. It's just a question of selection, okay, and keeping up to date, obviously. And what you're looking for, and they should be looking for, is a down to earth, practical approach. No waffle, no overselling, etc. At a price that is sustainable and, if you like, compares reasonably well with what is already available in the market. That's what the key will be in terms of the help. There, of course, will be, as a official sources and in terms of background and in-depth knowledge, etc., etc. That would be part of the normal package of studying for the business you're in. So I see that as an aside, But basically, it's choosing who you work with in the future at whatever level of intimacy in terms of the business and yourself and they. And that would be the big challenge rather than needing to look too much, I think.
I guess, like anyone else, you're also looking at it from your business point of view and yourself. How do you? You're a very experienced gentleman, I know. So, how do you keep sane in all this? And what is your personal advice to? Because you're also a leader of a business. What do you do to keep yourself sane? Being isolated at home and all that stuff.
No, no, which you totally. Read voraciously. There are good people out there writing good stuff. I have to go, and this is very important. One could be very cynical and say mainstream media is all preaching the same message, which is interesting. But we also have an internet of a very radical spread of people and thinking. A lot of rubbish, a lot of dangerous thinking. But broadly speaking, if we think back to when we were encouraged, even at school, to read around the subject in order to then sort of average out the good and bad and come to some personal conclusion. That's the whole thing is we've literally fallen into a trap over 20, 30 years of relying on banks to do our financial management, on politicians to run our political affairs, etc., on every provider, in other words, to actually look after us. We don't have that luxury anymore. We've got to think for ourselves. We've been fooled too often, if we take April Fool's Day being today, um, to live with that anymore. And that's the most dangerous thing for all of the chancers, I would call them, in the mix out there. Now, what they're doing really is breeding a very, very savvy set of consumers who are educating their kids to the same, if you like, questioning attitude and lifting the lid more often than not. Things they never did before. They're second guessing brands because of various other if you like, cons that have actually been revealed over the time in terms of some people taking chances. They're evaluating what they pay for help in terms of any service provider, and that is helpful indeed. But the key is, as I do believe, is they're thinking for themselves. A healthy development, but very challenging for anybody trying to rule them or keep them at home for the future in terms of similar crises as they occur.
What about people that work in these sectors? What would you say? There's one thing being the leader, but then there's also the people on the ground. There's a lot of people that are concerned if they have jobs to come back, and there's different economists that's been out and they to try to give different pictures of where the job market's going to go. There's somebody that says it's just all going to bounce back, but that's not what I hear you saying. There's no V curve here. And then there's what you're saying, which I think it's probably on the outcome. It's going to crawl very slowly back, and it's going to go a long time before we see so much liquidity in an economy again, if we ever in our lifetime going to see that again.
That is the most painful part of this discussion. The human impact we have to be very, very careful of. There are sensitivities out there, and there are real practical issues for people. We have to be, if we in any way influence that situation, be very responsible and feel very much for the individual as much as possible. There will be people no longer employed in certain industries, without a doubt. We're just leaped in big step into online in all its respects, and that doesn't mention people very often in the sense of going to a place and doing work. People have to be as flexible as possible to think big about the job, and just in terms of giving, in their own sense, value for money in whatever way, and not see themselves, if possible, locked into particular types of work, but to maintain that flexibility, to educate their kids to be more flexible minded in a manner of speaking, to accept change as a given, and that may be part of the actual future norm, if you like, for some people. And above all, to help those who, through no fault of their own, are actually suffering through this and will in the future possibly. But bearing in mind everything has a cost and it will be charged up in some way, and that has to be, I think, run the numbers on everything and just see what can be done within, if you like, the way we want to live our lives. So very fundamental. I've never had to look at it so much in that way before. But no, the people at home are having time to think of these things. They're going to come back changed without a doubt.
It's also very interesting from the two. There's two elements in what you just said. The two answers you gave. We had Charlie McVeigh on the normal podcast, Hospitality Mavericks, and around Christmas time, and it was just election day, and he said that it's very important in business that we come back to. He said, of course, we should take care of our people. We should take care of our communities, but also we can't do that if we don't have a net profit, he said. And there has been too much, leveraging going on and not realistic looking at, do you actually have a business that can make a net profit? So I think that nicely ties up what you say as well. And net profit also goes for private economy and so on. Can you actually afford what you have? Can you afford that car? Can you afford those 3 holidays? Or it's gonna be a rough ride, for many. There's no one winning here. There's always winners, but most people are losing in the moment. There's no doubt about no matter how much money you have. It's a difficult game in the moment. So
No, without a doubt, and will become tighter as governments have to take some of that money back in some way, even from the wealthier ones, etc. The key is just, I would think, value for money. I apply it across the whole spectrum of activity, unfortunately, but we have to do that. And we do what we can manage to do, and hopefully not let too many people slip through the cracks. We have a responsibility for them as well, obviously. And ourselves, we just have to make sure that what we do basically satisfies a need somehow, from a job point of view, obviously, at a price we feel we're worth in terms of being paid. And we just deliver, slightly over deliver on that, in terms of in terms of attitude, I suppose, to what we're doing. So very fundamental.
Brian, this was a very, very great, deep analysis, but also, a projection of what's coming. I'm sure that leaders can use this to get inspired, but also get some facts before they start to reset their businesses, which it's going to happen very fast. I think that people and you're going to move very fast, or else somebody comes and takes away the carpet. So again, Brian, as always, great insights and understanding of the complex things that's going on here. Where can people follow you if they want to know a bit more about you, Brian, before we say goodbye to you?
No, I understand perfectly. I use LinkedIn twice or three times a day, so anybody can find me there at LinkedIn. And secondly, obviously, we have a magazine where these thoughts we try out and publicize and get reaction from people that help keep us on, if you like, a practical course in that respect. So NamNews, campcity.com, and LinkedIn. Apart from my personal phone number as well, for those who would like to chat. But effectively, I can be reached without a doubt. Yeah.
Good, Brian. We'll put that in the show notes as well, so people can find out you out there. And I'll say it's definitely worth to follow NamNews. I do that myself, and it just sometimes is always good to have facts instead of too much gut in business and in life, because emotion sometimes overshadows our decisions. Brian, you stay safe and take care in all of this. And I send you power, energy, and love to you and your loved ones. And hopefully next time we meet is over a coffee or a beer, as we did before this.
in somewhere that is open. So I look forward and do appreciate, Michael, taking time to have a chat in this way. I hope it's helpful to some of the people that you work with in that respect. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Brian, for your great insights and thoughts about how the world looks from a business perspective in the current environment. It's clear that positioning the market and achieving net profit will be key for survival in the years to come. Remember, if you would like to know more about Brian, you can do that via LinkedIn, Brian Moore, or check out his blog at campcityblog.com. Please share this podcast so other industry people also can get great insight and advice. If you would like more of this, please subscribe to one of our channels. More to come very soon. If you're not signed up to the newsletter, go to experience101.live and sign up today. Thanks to our partner HM, Tahola and Vita Mojo for supporting us getting this out to more movers, shakers and mavericks. Together we can overcome this. Thanks for listening and be kind out there.
We need more help, call the whole town. Now let's try and get this thing off the ground. All in together, let's gather round. We're gonna try and get